Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic Saturday. Thanks so much for staying with us. I'm here with Dill of US Bank, and we just got done talking about before the pre-approval process in the last segment and how important that can be, not only for the seller, but also for the buyer, and giving them the confidence they need to move forward with. With that said, is now we have the appraisal process, and that's probably for sellers, I can say, Mark, is kind of a scary thing, especially in the Metro East, in Opale and Shiloh, Belmo, Swansea, more typical places where a VA loan might be done. Okay, that sellers get freaked out, and sometimes even agents, inexperienced agents, get freaked out. Maybe you can kind of shed some light on that.
Well, in my experience, that's just a misconception. There really is not that much difference between a VA FHA conventional type appraisal. A VA appraisal has to be done by someone that is VA certified and on the VA's approved list, which many times may be a local appraiser anyway. So can they be a little bit more detailed or dig a little deeper? Sometimes, yes, but it is definitely nothing to be scared about, especially if you've got the home priced right. The appraisal process, really within 3 days of application, we have to get out 3 business days. We have to get out initial disclosures. Once the initial disclosures are sent, that next day the appraisal is ordered. And then it's picked up by an appraiser. Typically, most lenders, it would be on a rotation basis, and same way with the VA. VA has 2 weeks from the date that they are assigned the order to inspect it and deliver it to the lender. Conventional and so forth, there isn't really a hard line date. Typically, you're looking at a week to 10 days from the order being placed. Honestly, that's pretty typical in the market. The appraisal, when it gets back, obviously it is typically reviewed by some kind of internal checks and measures department before it's released to me for review, and I immediately get a hold of the buyer and let them know where it appraised at, and I will get a hold of the agent and just let them know that, hey, appraisal's all good.
Sure.
Just to so they can give the sellers peace of mind. But it's a misconception on the VA. There's nothing to be scared of with a VA appraisal, and I would not hesitate to accept VA financing in an offer.
No, that's good to know, and a couple of things too. And on the real estate side, you can, if you don't use those pricing guidelines we talked about earlier in the show about location of past sales, current past sales, and then choosing from that range, you can get yourself in problems with the appraisal. Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, again, they're looking at what's sold, and they're going to be using that as a guideline. And so, again, if you decide to shoot the works, that's your call. But understanding that could be an appraisal process, even if you get a contract. We've seen people that waited it out for 5 or 6 months, and they finally got that offer, and they got that offer they exactly wanted, and they go to the appraisal process, and boom, it's gone.
Right.
And all of a sudden now that 6 months and that $12,000 or $15,000 of cost while they had the house listed on the market and hoping and praying that they get that didn't turn out. So that's something to keep in mind. I also like what you said too is there's a timeline. I think sellers don't always understand that. They hear that appraisal's being done and they're going to then the next day get the answer. And that just isn't the case.
It does not. That is not the only appraisal that appraiser has to do.
Okay.
So that's the issue there. And and the thing is that if an appraisal comes in lower than the purchase contract, I mean, as a lender, we have to go by the lower of the appraised value or the purchase price. Mm-hmm. Okay, whichever one's lower. So your new purchase price turns into the appraised value unless you and the buyer negotiate it.
Sure. Sure.
So that's just important to know that, okay, what does happen if the appraisal comes in low, and that's what happens. You got to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to split this difference, or am I going to drop the price, or what are you going to do? But it's an uncomfortable situation to be in. So if you can get it priced right with a professional like yourself, that shouldn't happen.
Right, and that's probably the main point too. Is look, we're not in a perfect world. There are, unfortunately, some bad appraisals that come out there. It does happen. So I don't want to say that every time everything is perfect. But usually when you have a bad appraisal, that's a totally different animal than a house not appraising out. And what I mean by that, can I give you some examples? Usually when we see a bad appraisal, I mean, they miss it by $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. I mean, it's crazy. Maybe you've seen the same thing. I mean, it's just, everyone agrees. It's not just the seller, the buyer, everyone agrees this is a bad deal. And those things, it's not 100%, but those are much easier to work out and try to figure out a different path. Where it's not quite as easy to work out is when you're talking about, again, $10,000 or $15,000, and maybe that's because someone, the seller thought the square footage was going to win the day. And again, square footage is a factor, but again, the location is going to be more of a driving factor of that, and that's what the appraisal is looking at. Or they've, and we've seen this more than a few times, a lake or a golf course. Okay, and Mark's nodding his head. He's on radio. He forgets.
Well, that's exactly right. And the thing is the in-ground pools. They just, a lot of people spend a lot of money on in-ground swimming pools and all the concrete that goes along with them, and you just don't.
Right, you just don't have recover. No, you get to enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can have pool for. I've had a pool for 20 years, so there's nothing wrong with that. So you have the enjoyment, but again, it goes back on the appraisal. I think it's something like 94% of everything the appraiser looks at is inside the home, and there's something like 6%, and that has to cover the outside of the home. That has to cover, so if it has brick or if it has siding, it doesn't, kind of walks into that. The size of the yard, if it has a fence, if it has a deck, if it has a swim pool. So that's not much latitude in there when it comes down to the appraisal. So it's important to know.
Right.
Having said that, we're going to be talking in our next segment. It's going to be a little bit of a wrap up, but we're going to talk about what next week's show is going to be about. I think you're going to be really excited about that. That has to do with staging. That's a great way of being able to make top dollar off of your home, and you'd be surprised on how easy it can be. Look, the book, Ready, Set, Sold, .org, not .com. Go get it. There's this information, but there's so much we just don't have time for. So go ahead, get it, readysetsold.org, not .com. Get the book. You're listening to Ready, Set, Sold. I'm your host, Bryan Vogt. We'll see you in a few.